September 1944. Arnhem, Holland. The largest airborne operation in history was unraveling into catastrophic chaos. British paratroopers scattered across 16 square miles of hostile territory faced impossible odds, surrounded, outgunned, cut off from relief. Communications shattered, chain of command broken, German SS panzer divisions closing in from every direction. In the confusion, friend became indistinguishable from foe. Death came from shadows that might hold comrades or enemies. Then in the darkness of the Dutch countryside, a sound emerged that would rewrite the rules of survival. Click-clack, click-clack. A child's toy cricket clicker, dismissed by senior officers as absurd, became the only language that could be trusted when radios failed and every shadow concealed lethal threat. 17 September 1944, 1300 hours. The skies above Arnhem erupted with the roar of 1,500 transport aircraft and 500 gliders, the largest airborne armada ever assembled. Major Anthony Dean Drummond watched from the door of his Dakota as the Dutch countryside spread beneath him like a watercolor painting, deceptively peaceful. The wind rushed past at 120 miles per hour, carrying the acrid smell of aviation fuel and the metallic taste of adrenaline. Temperature 14 degrees Celsius, visibility perfect, conditions textbook, intelligence briefings catastrophically wrong. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. The 1st British Airborne Division would seize the bridge at Arnhem, the final obstacle between Allied forces and the industrial heart of Germany. Hold for 48 hours, link up with XXX Corps advancing from the south. Operation Market Garden would end the war by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery himself had staked his reputation on it. The intelligence assessment was unequivocal. Minimal German resistance, perhaps a few hundred garrison troops, old men and boys from training battalions. The reality waiting on the ground would prove so divergent from these assumptions that it bordered on criminal negligence. The drop zones were 8 miles from the bridge. The radios, new American SCR 300 sets, had been tested in England. They worked perfectly there. In the dense Dutch terrain, surrounded by buildings and trees, their effective range collapsed from 5 miles to barely 300 yards. By 1400 hours, communications between battalions had already begun to fragment. By 1500 hours, companies had lost contact with their headquarters. By 1600 hours, individual platoons were operating in complete isolation, making decisions based on incomplete information that was already hours out of date. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, commanding 2nd Battalion, reached the bridge with 750 men. The rest of the brigade, nearly 8,000 paratroopers, were scattered across the countryside, attempting to fight their way through unexpectedly fierce resistance. The minimal German garrison proved to be the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions, supposedly refitting in the area, but in reality at nearly full strength with tanks, half-tracks, and veteran soldiers who had survived the Eastern Front. The British paratroopers carried bolt-action rifles, Sten guns, and a handful of Piat anti-tank weapons. They had come prepared for a parade ground and found themselves in an abattoir. Captain Robert Johnson, signals officer for 1st Parachute Brigade, realized the catastrophic dimension of their predicament by nightfall. In his command post in a Dutch farmhouse, he stared at a radio that produced nothing but static and the occasional incomprehensible fragment. "Without communications," he wrote in his journal that evening, "we are not an army. We are simply 8,000 individual men, all making different decisions based on different information, all moving in different directions. The Germans know where we are. We don't know where we are. They can coordinate their response. We cannot coordinate anything." The darkness brought a new horror that transformed tactical difficulty into existential crisis. German troops had captured British equipment, uniforms and identification. SS soldiers, many of whom spoke perfect English, began infiltrating British positions wearing captured red berets. Passwords became unreliable because the Germans had captured personnel who knew them. Visual identification became impossible because uniforms were identical. British soldiers encountered other British soldiers and had no way to determine if they were genuine comrades or German infiltrators. The standard procedure, challenging with a password and waiting for the countersign, resulted in British troops killing each other when nervous fingers pulled triggers before voices could respond. By midnight of the first day, the situation had deteriorated beyond anything experienced in previous airborne operations. Frost's force at the bridge was surrounded and under constant attack. The rest of the division was fragmented into dozens of isolated groups, unable to communicate, unable to coordinate, unable to distinguish friend from enemy in the darkness. Casualty rates were climbing exponentially, not from German fire alone but from the paralysis of uncertainty. Units that encountered each other in the darkness opened fire first and identified second. By dawn of 18th of September, 127 British paratroopers had been killed or wounded by their own side. Major Charles Monty Wilson, commanding C Company, 2nd Battalion, confronted this crisis in the most direct possible terms when his platoon accidentally engaged another British unit in a tobacco warehouse at 0300 hours. The firefight lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, 11 British soldiers were dead, and Wilson was staring at the corpse of a lieutenant he had trained with at Hardwick Hall in 1942. "We have defeated ourselves," he wrote later. "The Germans don't need to destroy us. We're doing it for them. We need a recognition signal that cannot be faked, cannot be forgotten, cannot be captured, and works in absolute darkness. We need it now, or by this time tomorrow there won't be enough of us left to matter." The problem was clear. The solution was not. Radios had failed. Passwords were compromised. Visual signals required light, which drew fire. Verbal challenges required men to expose their positions. Every conventional method of identification had proven inadequate. The 1st Airborne Division was trapped in a tactical paradox. Survival required coordination, but coordination required identification, and identification had become impossible. As the second night approached, officers across the scattered units independently reached the same conclusion. Without solving this fundamental problem, the division would be destroyed not by German superiority, but by its own inability to function as a cohesive force. 18th of September 1944, 0600 hours, temperature dropping to 8 degrees Celsius. Persistent rain transforming Dutch soil into thick mud. The wounded crowded into cellars and improvised aid stations. Morphine supplies already running critically low. Ammunition down to 30% of standard load. Food rations stretched to 1 meal per day. The resupply drops, visible in the sky, drifted over German lines because the drop zones were now in enemy hands. British paratroopers watched crates of ammunition, medical supplies and food descend into German positions while they rationed their last magazines. Captain Benjamin "Ben" Thompson, a pre-war schoolteacher from Manchester who had joined the Territorial Army in 1938, found himself commanding the remnants of 3 different companies after their officers had been killed. 47 men from units that no longer existed as coherent organizations, sheltering in a destroyed greenhouse on the outskirts of Oosterbeek. His Sten gun had jammed permanently that morning. His radio operator's set had been shattered by shrapnel at 0530 hours. The operator himself sat against a wall, with a field dressing wrapped around his head, eyes unfocused, muttering about his mother in Liverpool. Thompson's problem was mathematically simple and tactically impossible. British forces were scattered across approximately 4 square miles. He knew other units were out there. He could hear their firefights. He needed to consolidate, to bring those isolated groups together into something resembling a defensive perimeter. But to consolidate required movement, and movement required the ability to identify friendly forces in conditions where visual identification was unreliable and verbal challenges resulted in fratricide. He had watched it happen twice already that morning. British soldiers encountering British soldiers, both groups terrified, both groups exhausted, both groups opening fire, because waiting to verify identity meant giving the other group first shot. At 6:30 hours, Sergeant Arthur Davis entered the greenhouse, carrying something clutched in his fist. Davis was 41 years old, a veteran of Dunkirk, a Londoner who had survived the Blitz working as an ARP warden before rejoining the army. "Sir," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and smoke inhalation, "found this in a Dutch kid's bedroom in that house we cleared last night." He opened his hand. Inside was a small metal toy, a cricket clicker, the kind sold at fairgrounds for tuppence. Press the metal tongue, release, and it produced a distinctive two-note click-clack sound. Thompson stared at it. His first reaction was irritation that Davis was wasting his time with toys when they were hours from being overrun. His second reaction, arriving 3 seconds later, was recognition that Davis might have just solved the unsolvable problem. The cricket clicker produced a sound that was distinctive, unlike any weapon or equipment sound on the battlefield, mechanical, therefore difficult to convincingly reproduce with human voice, simple, requiring no training to operate, portable, weighing less than an ounce, silent until activated, not compromising positions, functional in absolute darkness, weatherproof and, critically, something the Germans could not fake because they didn't have them. "How many of these do you reckon exist in Arnhem?" Thompson asked. Davis shrugged. "Every kid in Holland probably has one, sir. Fairground toy, common as dirt." Thompson made a decision that violated every military protocol he had been taught. No authorization from brigade headquarters, because headquarters didn't exist as a functional entity anymore. No consultation with other unit commanders, because he couldn't contact them. No testing or evaluation, because there wasn't time. "Right," he said. "We're implementing a new recognition protocol immediately. 1 click-clack, you respond with 2 click-clacks. Friend, anything else, or no response enemy. Every house we pass, we find these bloody toys. We equip every section. We spread the word to every British soldier we encounter. As of now, the cricket clicker is our password." The implementation began with salvage operations that would have been comic under any other circumstances. British paratroopers, elite soldiers trained for years in airborne warfare, were now ransacking Dutch homes for children's toys. Private James Fletcher kicked in the door of a toy shop on Utrechtseweg at 07:115 hours and found 17 cricket clickers on a shelf. By 0800 hours, Thompson's composite force had accumulated 34 clickers, distributed 1 per section. The protocol was explained in terse, exhausted words. "Click once, wait. If you hear 2 clicks, friend. Anything else, Germans, pass it on." The first test came at 8:43 hours. Thompson's force was moving through dense woodland toward sounds of British resistance 400 yards north. Visibility 20 feet maximum through the trees. They heard movement ahead. Every man dropped to prone firing positions, fingers on triggers. Thompson, mouth dry with tension, pressed his cricket clicker once. Click, clack. The sound seemed absurdly loud in the stillness. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then from the darkness ahead, click-clack, click-clack. "Red Berets," Thompson shouted. "We're Red Berets, 2nd Battalion." A voice called back, hoarse and relieved. "Thank Christ. Thought you were Jerry's. Come ahead." The unit ahead was Lieutenant Peter Wallace's platoon, 31 men who had been isolated for 18 hours. They had been moving blindly, attempting to reach friendly lines, firing at everything that moved, because they had no way to determine identity until after engagement began. "We killed 6 of our own last night," Wallace said, his face grey with shock and exhaustion. 6 men, because we couldn't identify them before shooting. Thompson handed him 3 cricket clickers. "New recognition protocol. 1 click, respond with 2. Get your men equipped. Pass it to anyone you meet." By noon of 18th September, the cricket clicker protocol was spreading through British positions, not through official channels, which no longer existed, but through organic contact between units. A soldier equipped with a clicker would encounter another unit, demonstrate the protocol, distribute clickers if available, or instruct them to scavenge their own. The protocol's elegance lay in its simplicity and its organic propagation. It required no infrastructure, no communication network, no formal orders. It spread like folk knowledge, soldier to soldier, section to section, through a division that had lost all formal command structure. German forces noticed the clicking sounds by mid-afternoon. An intercepted radio transmission from SS Hauptsturmführer Klaus Dietrich to his regimental commander described strange clicking noises in areas where British forces operated. The transmission concluded, purpose unknown. Possibly equipment malfunction or new type of ranging device. The Germans, trained in rigid military doctrine, could not conceive that enemy forces would adopt a recognition system based on children's toys. Their training emphasized complex passwords, sophisticated challenge response protocols, and formal identification procedures. The notion that elite paratroopers would rely on fairground novelties was intellectually inconceivable. By nightfall of 18th September, approximately 840 British soldiers were equipped with cricket clickers. The night movement that had been suicidal on the previous night became tactically viable. Units could probe forward in darkness, make contact with unidentified forces using the clicking protocol, and consolidate without fratricide. The casualty rate from friendly fire dropped from 127 on the first night to 11 on the second night, a 91% reduction. The consolidation that had been impossible was now merely desperately difficult instead of mathematically impossible. The human cost remained staggering. The innovation was not salvation, it was amelioration of disaster. Men still died in extraordinary numbers, but they died fighting Germans, not killing each other in confused darkness. The difference was moral as well as tactical. Soldiers could fight with the knowledge that the figure in the shadows responding to their cricket click was genuinely their comrade, not an infiltrator about to kill them. 19th September 1944, 0330 hours. The remnants of 1st Airborne Division had contracted into a defensive perimeter roughly 1 mile in diameter around Oosterbeek. German forces had them surrounded with a numerical superiority approaching 7-1 and overwhelming superiority in armor and artillery. SS Standartenführer Walter Harzer, commanding the German forces, had expected British resistance to collapse within 48 hours. Instead, 72 hours into the operation, British forces continued to maintain a cohesive defense despite catastrophic losses and complete isolation. German tactical doctrine, refined through 5 years of warfare, emphasized the importance of disrupting enemy command and control. Capture or kill officers, destroy communications, isolate units from each other, and enemy forces would fragment into disorganized groups that could be defeated piecemeal. At Arnhem, the Germans had executed this doctrine perfectly. British officers had been killed at extraordinary rates, 40% casualties among company-grade officers by 19 September. Communications had been destroyed. Fewer than 5% of radios still functional. Units had been fragmented. The division's order of battle existed only on paper. By every metric that German doctrine considered decisive, British resistance should have collapsed. Yet British forces continued to operate with coordination that German intelligence officers found inexplicable. Small units moved during darkness with confidence that contradicted their isolation. Scattered groups consolidated into the defensive perimeter through night movements that should have been impossible without working radios. Counterattacks were launched by composite forces that had no business being able to coordinate without formal command structure. SS Obersturmführer Heinrich Schulze, intelligence officer for 9th SS Panzer Division, wrote in his after-action report, "Enemy forces demonstrate coordination inconsistent with observed command and control degradation. British units operate with tactical cohesion despite radio silence and officer casualties. Methodology unknown. The clicking sounds had been reported consistently since 18th of September, but German analysis dismissed them as insignificant. The sounds were too simple, too unsophisticated, too informal to constitute a military communication system. German doctrine emphasized complexity and structure. Recognition protocols involved lengthy passwords that changed daily, elaborate challenge-response sequences, and formal procedures that required training and memorization. The possibility that British forces had abandoned this complexity in favor of a system literally any child could operate violated fundamental assumptions about how professional militaries functioned. At 0445 hours on 19th of September, SS Hauptsturmführer Dietrich led a night infiltration patrol specifically designed to exploit British communication breakdown. His 12 men were equipped with captured British weapons, wore captured British smocks over their SS uniforms, and had memorized British passwords extracted from captured personnel. They infiltrated British lines through a gap in the perimeter, moving silently through the darkness toward what intelligence identified as a company headquarters in a destroyed church. At 50 yards from their objective, they encountered a British patrol. Both groups froze. Dietrich, speaking in perfect English with a passable Yorkshire accent, called out, "Don't shoot! 2nd Battalion!" The response was not verbal. It was a sound. Click-clack. Dietrich and his men stood in confused silence. The sound meant nothing to them. They had no context for interpreting it, no knowledge of the protocol, no understanding that their failure to respond correctly had just identified them as hostile. The British patrol opened fire at a range of 15 yards. 8 Germans died in the initial volley. Dietrich and 3 others survived by running directly away from British lines. His after-action report described the encounter with frustrated incomprehension. British challenged with mechanical device producing clicking noise, purpose unknown, correct response unknown, cannot be replicated. The cricket clicker protocol had neutralized German infiltration tactics entirely. The infiltrators could replicate everything about British forces except the specific mechanical sound produced by the clickers. They could capture passwords, uniforms, weapons, even personal effects. They could not capture or replicate the physics of a specific mechanical toy that produced a specific sound. German intelligence evaluated the problem and concluded it was tactically insurmountable. Manufacturing replica clickers would require identifying the device, understanding its mechanism, manufacturing sufficient quantities, distributing them to infiltration units, and training soldiers in the protocol, a process requiring weeks. The battle would be decided in days. The philosophical dimension of German perplexity extended beyond tactical inconvenience. The German military tradition emphasized Auftragstaktik, mission-type orders that gave subordinates latitude in execution while maintaining strict hierarchical structure. This worked superbly when communications functioned. When communications failed, German units followed doctrine. They executed their last orders or waited for new orders to arrive through runners or by re-establishing radio contact. The notion of informal soldier-initiated protocols that spread organically without official authorization contradicted everything they had been taught about military organization. British soldiers, by contrast, came from a culture that valued improvisation and muddle-through pragmatism. The Blitz had taught civilian Britain to solve problems with whatever materials were available. Unexploded bombs diffused with rope and intuition. Fires fought with stirrup pumps and sand buckets. Families sheltering in underground stations against regulations because it kept them alive. British paratroopers, often drawn from working-class communities that had experienced the Blitz firsthand, instinctively understood that survival sometimes required breaking or bypassing official procedures in favor of whatever actually worked. The clicking sounds continued throughout 19 and 20 September, now audible across the entire British perimeter. German forces reported them with increasing frequency, always with the notation that their significance remained unclear. SS officers debated whether the sounds were recognition signals, correct conclusion, but dismissed as too unsophisticated. Ranging devices for mortars, incorrect but consistent with German emphasis on technical complexity. Psychological warfare, incorrect but Germans were grasping for explanations, or merely stress-induced behavior from surrounded troops, incorrect but revealing German assumptions about British morale. By 20th of September, approximately 1,200 British soldiers, from an original force of 10,000, remained combat effective. They held a perimeter 1 mile across against a German force of 8,000 with tank support. They held because they could coordinate movement in darkness, consolidate scattered units, and prevent infiltration. They held because a mechanical toy costing tuppence had given them the one capability they needed most: the ability to distinguish friend from enemy when everything else had failed. German doctrine had no answer because German doctrine could not conceive of the question. 25 September 1944, 2200 hours. The evacuation across the Rhine began in darkness and rain. Of the 10,095 British soldiers who had dropped into Arnhem 9 days earlier, 2,163 crossed back to Allied lines. 1,485 had been killed. 6,447 were captured, many wounded. The bridge at Arnhem remained in German hands. Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's bold gamble to end the war by Christmas, had failed catastrophically. By conventional military metrics, the battle was a comprehensive defeat. Yet within that failure existed a success that would reshape how airborne forces approached the fundamental problem of coordination under catastrophic circumstances. The cricket clicker protocol, invented from desperation by men who would never be mentioned in official histories, had achieved something extraordinary. It had given a shattered division the capacity to function as an organized force despite the complete destruction of its formal command and control structure. The numbers told a story that few would fully understand. On the night of 17th to 18th September, before the cricket clicker protocol was implemented, 127 British casualties resulted from friendly fire. On subsequent nights, after protocol implementation, friendly fire casualties dropped to fewer than 40 total across 7 days of desperate fighting. The protocol had prevented approximately 280 friendly fire casualties, men who instead directed their fire at actual enemies rather than each other in confused darkness. Captain Thompson survived the evacuation. He crossed the Rhine on 25th of September, carrying his cricket clicker in his breast pocket, having given away dozens to other soldiers, but keeping the first one as a talisman. He returned to Britain, was promoted to major, and resumed teaching after the war at a comprehensive school in Salford. He never spoke publicly about Arnhem. When students asked about the medals on his chest during Remembrance Day assemblies, he told them only that he had done his bit, and that better men than him had not come home. The cricket clicker protocol was documented in after-action reports filed by multiple officers in late 1944 and early 1945. The reports described it with characteristic British understatement: improvised recognition system utilizing mechanical signaling devices proved effective in maintaining unit cohesion during communications breakdown. The innovation received no official recognition, no formal incorporation into doctrine, no distribution of equipment. Military bureaucracy, even while acknowledging its effectiveness, could not quite accept that children's toys warranted serious tactical consideration. The protocol's true impact emerged decades later, when military historians, conducting research for the 50th anniversary of Market Garden, discovered the after-action reports and began interviewing survivors. Sergeant Arthur Davis, who had found the first cricket clicker, was located in 1994, living in a council flat in Bermondsey. He was 89 years old. When asked about the clickers, he laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. "Course it worked," he said. "Wasn't complicated enough not to work. That was its beauty, innit? Generals want complicated plans with radios and passwords and procedures. We needed something that worked when everything went to shit. Found it in a kid's bedroom. The academic analysis revealed something profound about innovation under existential pressure. The most effective solution to the identification crisis was the simplest, the cheapest, the most readily available, and the one that military training and doctrine had conditioned officers to overlook. Procurement regulations would never have approved it. Formal evaluation procedures would have required months of testing. Doctrinal committees would have debated it for years. Yet implemented by exhausted men who had no time for procedure, it achieved its objective with immediate effectiveness. The cricket clicker incident entered military education as a case study in decentralized innovation and the importance of empowering soldiers to solve problems without waiting for official authorization. The U.S. Marine Corps incorporated the story into their squad leader training, emphasizing that perfect tactical solutions authorized from above are worthless if they arrive after the battle is lost. Imperfect solutions implemented immediately by the men on the ground win firefights. The British Army's Leadership Academy at Sandhurst uses the case to illustrate the principle that rank and formal authority matter less in crisis than initiative and practical effectiveness. The human dimension remained most significant. The cricket clicker protocol saved lives by the hundreds, men who survived not because of superior firepower or brilliant strategy, but because they could identify each other in darkness and thereby fight as organized units rather than isolated individuals shooting at shadows. Those survivors returned to Britain, married, raised families, worked ordinary jobs, and rarely spoke about what they had experienced. Their children and grandchildren exist because a child's toy costing tuppence gave their fathers or grandfathers the ability to survive 9 days of hell. The last veteran of Arnhem who had used the cricket clicker protocol, Private James Fletcher, died in 2019 at age 94. His obituary in the local paper mentioned his service at Arnhem in a single sentence. At his funeral, his grandson placed a cricket clicker in his coffin. No one present except his surviving sister understood the significance. She was 91 years old and said only, "He kept that bloody thing on his mantle for 70 years, said it saved his life. I never understood why, until I read the books about Arnhem. Then I understood everything." The cricket clicker protocol proved something essential about human ingenuity under pressure. The greatest innovations are often the simplest, implemented not by committees or regulations, but by ordinary people refusing to accept death as inevitable. The men of the 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem did not have superior resources, brilliant generalship, or technological advantage. They had mud, darkness, children's toys, and determination not to let their comrades die through preventable confusion. From those ingredients, they created a solution that German tactical doctrine could not overcome, because German doctrine could not conceive that military problems might have unmilitary solutions. That capacity for improvisation, for solving impossible problems with inadequate resources, for refusing to wait for official authorization when immediate action could save lives. That was the essence of the British character under pressure. It was not unique to Arnhem. It was the spirit that had survived the Blitz, that would rebuild shattered cities, that would muddle through every subsequent crisis with determination and dry humor and whatever materials were to hand. The cricket clicker was just one small manifestation of something far larger, the stubborn, practical, resourceful refusal to accept defeat simply because the situation was hopeless. If this story of ordinary men achieving extraordinary things with improvisation and determination resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold histories from the Second World War. These stories deserve to be remembered, not just the grand strategies and famous battles, but the ingenuity and resilience of soldiers who solved impossible problems with whatever they had to hand. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. or if your family has similar stories from the war that deserve wider recognition. Let's ensure these acts of courage and creativity are never forgotten.